So let's start the session, today's session.
Okay, sir.
Yeah.
A very good afternoon to all of you. I, Yogita Dwivedi from CBIP, welcome you all the participants for the second day of program on disaster management. Previous day was very interactive and interesting session. We have heard so many positive comments and thoughts about that, and hoping the same blast for today. Moving further, our both the faculties, Mr. Munish and Mr. Nishal, has already joined the session. Welcome, sir. One of our senior officer, Mr. S.K. Lamba, has also joined the session today. I would like to add two important points for all the participants. Please keep your audio and video on shut to avoid unnecessary noises and for smooth session. If anybody wants to raise a question or have any query or thoughts, please post it on chat window. Second, regarding the PPT, I will be share both the presentation and participation certificates with all of you. So thank you for joining us. Munish sir, now stage is yours and you may proceed now.
Thank you, Yogita. I'm just sharing my screen. So, received few questions related to the basic concepts of disaster management. Let me start the session with those basic concepts, and then I'll hand over the session to our lead faculty for today, Dr. Nishal Gupta. So initially for about 30 to 40 minutes, I'll be taking the session related to whatever we have ended the session yesterday, and then following with the queries which you have right now. So there are some queries related to the basic concepts like vulnerability, which was asked yesterday, and how to in what should be the structure of disaster management plan. So that was the particular questions which was asked. So let me share specific slides related to that. This will answer all your basic queries. Yogita, can you disconnect because I want to share something, but it is showing something else. I need to share my screen, but it is not showing that.
Our IT team is also with us. Ravinder sir, can you help him?
Yes, sir. So earlier it's on your presentation, sir.
Can you all see my screen now?
Yes, sir. Now it's
Okay. So one question was related to vulnerability, which was asked yesterday. So just to define and give the understanding of the vulnerability. So it is about the extent to which a community structure, service or geographical area is likely to be damaged or disrupted by the impact of a particular hazard. Because when we are talking about disasters, so this starts from a word hazard. So for example, fire is an hazard, but vulnerability can vary from person to person, from organization to organization, and it is about the extent to which damage can happen to a certain area, to a certain population, or to certain location. So vulnerability is something which is related to the extent of damage, how much extent of damage can happen at any place. It will depend on the capacity or the infrastructure or the design of that particular area. So this is about the vulnerability. If we say in the short, it is likely extent of damage due to a hazard. Now, this vulnerability can be of multiple types. It can be of physical vulnerability. It can be of like social vulnerability when we are talking about male, female, or young population or old population. So if there are young persons, the damage may be less. But if you're talking about the old age persons, they are highly vulnerable to the impact of disaster. So you can relate the term vulnerability with the social factors. We call it as social vulnerability. There can be technological vulnerability. If any organization is technologically perfect and confident in responding to various disasters, their vulnerability will be less in comparison to those organizations who are less competent. So you can relate these examples: physical vulnerability, economical vulnerability, poor people, livelihood of the people are also very important factor. How we are responding to the disasters, we discussed it yesterday. Then social vulnerability examples are also given. Environmental vulnerability, we discussed that there can be certain area which is having the reserve forest or some kind of flora and fauna which is very unique in nature. So they are highly vulnerable in terms of impact of any disaster. So this is about the vulnerability. And if we talk about the risk, we have already discussed, I'm not repeating into it, the relationship between hazard and vulnerability. If you see, hazard multiply vulnerability is equal to disaster. So more the vulnerability, more will be the effect of disaster. So less vulnerable population, less vulnerable area will get impacted, less the disaster impact will be less. And there was one question related to capacity building also. Capacity is nothing but the resources of individual. Resources can be in terms of knowledge, resources can be in terms of physical resources available to cope up with a threat or resist the impact of hazard. So if you go back to the definition of disaster, which we discussed yesterday. So disaster is all about the coping capacity of the community, because we are talking about the disaster impact at a larger population. So if the capacity of any community is such that it can cope up with a flood situation up to certain level, then it will not be disaster because they are having capacity to deal with it. So capacity is all about the resources. It is all about the knowledge, awareness. So more the people are aware about disaster, they will be more confident in dealing with those disaster situation. So it includes everything which helps a community or an organization in responding to the disaster. It can be like some organizations are already having a lot of resources to deal with situation like fire safety. They will be considered as highly capable, or their capacity will be higher. Or some organization may have less amount of preparedness in terms of their resources availability. So their capacity building is recommended in that situation. That's how these terms are related to each other. I hope these basic queries related to the disaster will be clear now, because I saw some of the questions related to these basic concepts in the chat box. Okay, so moving further, now let me show you the structure of disaster management plan. Okay, so this was the queries which was asked by lot many participants yesterday. So this is the recommended structure of disaster management plan, and it is considering the various legislative requirements, various codes related to disaster, fire, and multiple hazards which we know, and basis on the experience of working with multiple organizations. So we have worked on many disaster management plans. but this can be an ideal disaster management plan for any organization, and you can map this structure with your existing disaster management plan of the organization. Okay, so this is introduction. It can have basic introduction and overview of an organization. Scope includes what all you are covering in disaster management plan, because this may include off-site and on-site emergencies and disaster impacts. Off-site, when we are using the term, it means that you are covering those disaster which can impact beyond the boundaries of your organization, because disasters are such in nature that it affects a lot of neighborhood. So neighborhood of any organization also needs to be considered. Then reference standards, codes and regulatory requirements. You can very well mention all the laws, standards and regulatory requirements which you are referring while preparing your disaster management plan. The next section is related to physiography and company detail. I'll also be looking to the chat box because I'm not seeing that. If you have any input related to that, you can share in between. Okay. So physiography and company detail includes the geographical location and all the neighborhood, what type of infrastructure is available nearby to your organization or your plant, from where you are for which you are making this disaster management plan. So neighborhood details are important from the perspective that whenever there will be disaster impact, what all can be impacted from disaster. So you can use Google Earth or any other software to locate the neighborhood details into your disaster management plan. That is one way to do that. Then second section includes the process flow diagram of the company. So if we are making disaster management plan for a hydropower station, so it is very important to include the process flow diagram of the company, how your process is being taken care of, what type of product you are manufacturing if you are manufacturing industry. So accordingly, this will give sufficient idea about the hazards involved in your process also. Sometimes there are hazards involved as a part of your process. For example, a few companies are using hazardous chemicals in their process. So process flow includes the flow of chemicals, the sequence of various process. So it becomes important to identify the hazards as a part of this process. So this is the second section. Third section includes organization structure, wherein you can include your existing departments and their heads, just to give the clarity about various departments with which you are dealing with. And next, the core area is hazard, risk, and vulnerability analysis. It is known as HRVA. So this section is very core part of disaster management plan. So it includes what all hazards you want to include in your disaster management plan basis on hazard analysis exercise which has been conducted. There can be hazards at local level. There can be hazards at community or bigger size level. So accordingly, you need to include the hazards as a part of hazard analysis. There are a few examples. We need to include natural and man-made situations, fire, flood, landslides, earthquake, bomb threats. So whatever potential emergency situations which can impact your organization. So all those emergency situations, potential emergencies will come here as part of hazard. You will explain that if we are talking about the earthquake, it should have the sections, it should have detail related to how your organization or your industry is vulnerable to earthquake, in which location you are situated, what zone you have, what type of infrastructure you have, how your structure is made, are you structural, are you structurally stable. So those kinds of detail will come in these things, just to explain the hazard in this. So it can have more detail, more number of disasters in this section. So just an indicative numbers are given here. Pandemic is also very important these days because before this COVID-19, lot of organizations were not having any preparedness for pandemic. So you need to include pandemic in your hazard, risk and vulnerability analysis section. Then you will do vulnerability analysis. For example, if you're talking about the fire, your storage of chemical area will be highly vulnerable in comparison to the areas where there is no storage of any chemical. So that's the way where you will do vulnerability analysis, and you will do capacity analysis also. What preparedness, what type of capacity you have done, and more detail you will be including in resource mapping of the company. So resource mapping of the company will help you in understanding what type of resources are available to deal with multiple hazards or to deal with multiple emergency situations which are possible. So you will do complete resource mapping. It can be like complete inventory of all the resources which are available with your organization related to various disaster situations. So that's uh, the way you will be doing resource mapping. It's like an inventory of all the resources available with you. The next section is prevention and mitigation. So you will include preventive and mitigative measures for various emergency and disaster situations, for fire, for landslides, for earthquake, for chemical explosion, for earthquake. So you can have that number of sections in prevention and mitigation. The next section is related to preparation. What type of preparation is required just before the onset of any natural disaster or any man-made situations? You will include those preparatory steps for fire, for earthquake, flood, in case of any great failure or whatever emergencies you have identified. Then if you have done preparedness, the mock drill and exercise, how will you conduct the testing of your emergency response plan or disaster management plan? You will include those frequencies and how will you do this mock drill exercise. Those detail will come here. Then training and awareness becomes very important, wherein you will be including what type of training and capacity building you are doing with your employees and various staff. Community involvement becomes very important in offsite planning because community is the best stakeholder in terms of responding to various disasters. The next section is response. Now, if you see the sequence of these sections will match with the disaster management cycle, which we have discussed yesterday. So we are going by the same sequence, which is given in the disaster management cycle, apart from including some other related sections, which is important for disaster management planning. So response will come here in the next section, wherein you will include all the institutional arrangements for disaster response. You will put the details of emergency response team. Sometimes it is known as quick response team. There are multiple terminologies used for emergency response team. You can use the best or your terms according to your manuals or internal standards which you are following. So this is just a term and you can change these things. Sometimes it is known as quick response team, sometimes it is crisis management team or emergency response team. So emergency response team is the more standardized term you can use this way. So response includes all these things. The next ninth section is related to roles and responsibilities of emergency response team, wherein uh, roles and responsibilities for each and every team member will come. All the departments responsibilities will come, starting from emergency commander, who is the leader of emergency response team. It is also known as chief controller. It is also known as incident commander. So it depends upon the term which you are using. Then first aid team, what will be their roles and responsibilities in various responsibilities? Search and rescue team responsibilities and early warning and communication team responsibilities. So putting down the roles and responsibilities in advance is very important. Otherwise, if you start assigning roles and responsibility during disaster situation, that will become havoc. Everybody will get confused. So roles and responsibilities must be decided prior to disaster or emergency situation. So that's why this section is also very important part of disaster management planning. So you will put down the common roles and responsibilities on all the emergency situation in this section. Then next is emergency evacuation, because most of the disaster situation need the evacuation. So you will define whenever there is how you will take decision about the evacuation, need of evacuation will come into picture. Evacuation procedure, how will you be evacuating the stuck population? Then do's and don'ts for evacuation can come here, because in most of the emergency situation, when we are not able to respond or fight with the emergency situation, then evacuation will become mandatory in that situation. The next 11th section is about disaster specific action planning. You can put down specific action plan in case of fire, earthquake, chemical explosion, flood, landslides, or whatever emergencies you have identified in the initial section. So specific action plan will come here, and common roles and responsibilities will go up in the 9th section. Then details of emergency control room, wherein you will set up the full control in case of any disaster situation. So those details will come here. What type of arrangements are there? You can include those details. Then last section can be the annexes. So whatever additional information you need, you can put it all these in the annexer sections. So this is about the structure of disaster management plan. Uh, which is recommended for any organization as per the expectation of various standards and legislations. I'll be sharing this structure also with all of you. You can refer this standard whenever you feel to refer. Okay. Okay. So Yogita, I'm not able to see the chat box today. Where is it? Okay. Yeah, it is coming in different way. Request you to please share the qualities criteria for section of team members for a company's emergency response plan. Okay, see, this question can be attended in detail. I'm getting a response that check the audio after restarting installation. Okay. So I hope you are getting my audio very clear, because I can see few responses. Okay. Okay, now after the structure, so related to structure, any query, I will be responding to the qualities of emergency response team in general, and then we can move further with the remaining section of yesterday's discussion. Let me open the presentation. Audio is fine. Okay, thank you. So we were continuing fire safety session because we couldn't go into detail of fire safety. So let me complete that first. We will be moving further. Okay. Okay, so we ended yesterday's session here in case of fire. Okay, chat box also. See, Pradeep Kumar is responding that cyclone is not covered in HRV. So the structure is just an indicative and it doesn't include each and every type of emergency or disaster which is possible. So you can include all possible emergency situations or disaster situation in your disaster management plan, because this structure was just an indicative structure. Okay. So let me send you the structure also if you are interested in this. Okay, so this structure is now in the chat box, so you can download the structure for your references. And uh, just to make sure that you are able to use this structure very clearly, this structure has been made uh, in usable format. I'll show you how it is usable. Okay, so every section is hyperlinked. You can start putting details in these sections according to your requirement. And once you fill this detail, so this is already an hyperlink. You can make full uh, table of contents according to your requirement. So your sequence and the sections of disaster management plan will come in this way. So you can use this structure to customize, to update, or to review your existing disaster management plan. I'm assuming that every one of you would be having uh, disaster management plan. In fact, I have done research on multiple organizations during my academics for various disaster management plans. So there was some requirements according to international standards. I have included all those sequence in this structure itself. Okay. So I hope every one of you is able to download the structure now. Okay. So let's continue with the fire. We are getting one question. What precautions taken against cyclone for protection of towers of electricity? Okay. So this is related with the structural stability of the electricity. So most of the participants are responding that they are not able to download. So if you go in the chat box, you will see the structure. If you go in the chat box, just scroll up. Okay, you will be able to download the structure. Can't download. Yogita, can you check? I have shared this document to all the participants. Are they able to download, or how they would be able
Okay, okay, sir. Okay. Just 1 minute, sir.
Okay, yeah, maybe now you can now you can download. So it should show in the chat box. It is showing sending. Maybe there was some error from my side only. So can any one of you confirm now? Are you able to see the structure or download the structure now? Or we can send it later along with the presentations, which
Yes,
will be
sir.
sending
We are
by.
yes, sir. We are able to see the link or structure.
Okay, great, great. Right. So now let's continue with our fire safety section, which remained left. So in case of fire, what all should we do? See, there are some questions which are coming related to various disasters. So considering the time available with us, we are focusing on the very relevant and important aspects of various disasters. Okay, so there may be some situations that are not able to download. You can download from here. So I have shared the link. You can use this link also to download. Okay, so in case of fire, what should be the action at individual levels? I'll go a bit fast because Dr. Nishchal also have to cover the sessions which will be covered by him, especially the pandemic part and earthquake, structural and non-structural mitigations, and some very relevant part of cardiac arrest and CPR, which is we are talking about disasters, but if we are not talking about individual level emergencies, that will be incomplete. So that's why that session is also very important for all of you. So in case of fire, the first, leave the fire. In case of any disaster situation, it becomes very important to communicate, to cascade that emergency situation to all the occupants. So we need to respond. We need to quickly activate the alarm system. If that is not activated automatically, normally automatic fire alarm systems are available. It is activated by various uh, uh, integrated systems available. So communication becomes very important in all the disaster situation, and that's how in fire situation also it becomes very important. So there are systems available to activate the alarm system that is known as manual call point, MCP. You need to understand how to activate manual call point. There are different options available to use those manual call points. One is break the glass unit, which is very common. So after activating the MCPs and alarm system is getting activated, then you need to have the awareness on using the fire extinguisher. We will see some of the details on how to use the extinguisher, because this is very important to attend the emergency situation in the incipient or the beginning stage of fire. So you need to know how to operate fire extinguisher, and including all the population available in your premises. You should know where are the nearest exit, where is the assembly point, how to report the fire in case of the capacity is not such that it can be attended locally. So if you discover the fire, activate the alarm by activating the manual call point, attack using various fire extinguishers. But it is very important to understand the types of fire also. We will discuss about various types of fire which can be there in case of uh, confusion in taking decision what type of extinguisher is required to be used. So let's understand the basics of extinguishers. So this is how any common fire extinguisher look like. It has a main cylindrical body which has the extinguishing media, then which is having the extinguishing component. It can have gas, neutral gas, or it can have dry chemical powder. Can you answer me what type of dry chemical powder is available in the extinguisher? Name of the chemical which is there in the ABC type extinguisher. What is the chemical name? CO2, no. CO2 is wrong. CO2 in itself is monoammonium phosphate. Anjuji is giving right answer. Monoammonium phosphate, MAP, is the chemical name. DCP, when we are saying, is dry chemical powder, which is common name, but the chemical name is monoammonium phosphate, which is there in almost all the ABC type fire extinguishers. Okay. So how to use fire extinguisher? This becomes important if we are required to control the emergency and to avoid becoming a disaster. So there are 4 steps: pull the pin, aim at the base, and S is squeeze and S is sweep. So you will feel that it is not clear by this definition, but these are very simple. Every extinguisher is locked, and these extinguishers are locked by a small pin. So you need to remove the pin as a first step if you want to use the extinguisher. So pull the pin will become your first step. It means by pulling the pin, you have unlocked the extinguisher. Second step is aim at the base of fire. So while aiming at the base of fire, you need to understand if you are outside, if you are in open area, the direction of flow of air becomes very important. You need to take care of direction or flow of air. So the direction of firefighting should be in the direction of flow of air. If you are inside the building while you are aiming at the base of fire, the distance between you and fire should be such that you are able to protect yourself. If you are not feeling safe, don't try to extinguish fire extinguisher. Okay, so the distance example can be like, if it is ABC type fire extinguisher, the maximum distance can be 10 feet. If you're too close to fire, that is also dangerous. But if you're too away from fire, that is also not efficient to extinguish the fire extinguisher. The third step is squeeze the trigger. So normally ABC type extinguisher can be squeezed by pressing the V-shaped lever. If it is not the V-shaped lever, it can be CO2 gas type fire extinguisher. Then you can rotate the lever anti-clockwise. In the similar manner, you are rotating the tap while opening for water. Okay, sweep side to side. This is required to cover the larger area where fire is happening, so that it can be extinguished quickly. So this is about pass, PASS, pass. So this is a manual call point. Let me show you the video related to operation of fire extinguisher, so that you can relate these 4 steps. So I'm opening one video just to show.
बरोबर आना मंगता एकदम बरोबर बोले भाई सीखने का तेरे को हाँ भाई चल आजा समझा क्या बात, वेरी गुड। हाँ, समझा?
हाँ एकदम
चल आजा।
हम आपको दिखाएंगे कि इसको कैसे उपयोग किया जाता है। इसको
So if you are able to see the pin, this is the first step. You can remove the pin very easily by pulling it hard.
बोलते हैं CO2 4.5 kg एक्सटिंग्विशर।
हाँ।
इसको इलेक्ट्रिक फायर पे उपयोग किया जाता है, ठीक है।
This is
सबसे
CO2
पहले
extinguisher.
इसका डिस्चार्ज ट्यूब सीधा कीजिए,
हाँ,
हैंडल से पकड़िए।
The second step is the aim. After removing the pin, aim at the base of fire. So while aiming, it becomes very important to catch hold this discharge hose perfectly. So before squeezing the lever, you need to have full control over this discharge hose.
हाँ,
और सेफ्टी पिन निकालिए,
हाँ,
ठीक है।
Step
और उसके बाद
second, squeeze. So before squeezing, aim is very important and you need to have full control over discharge hose. Let's side to side to cover the larger area in case of the requirement. So this is the way fire extinguishers can be operated. So it was digital demonstration which we have done using the video, because we can't do practical demonstration in this session. And we have one very interesting query related to fireballs. Okay, so fireballs concept was started from Thailand. So Thailand as a country have patent related to fireball, and nowadays this is very trendy to include this fireball as a part of fire system arrangements at the location, because there is no training required to operate fireballs. It acts like an explosive. Because it is an explosive, it explodes with the temperature, and with the explosion it gives dry chemical powder only, the same chemical which is there in the extinguishers. This fireballs concept also have used the same component to extinguish the fire. So fireballs, if you are going to purchase, you need to see that it should have approval from PESO, Petroleum and Explosive Safety Organization, because this is a kind of small quantity of explosive is there in the surrounding of the ball, because with the temperature that will explode. So that should have some approval from PESO, and only very few companies are having approval from Petroleum and Explosive Safety Organization. Otherwise, lot of China balls are available which are not recommended, and these China balls are also not standardized one. So do take care of those things. And I'm not going to show the video of fireballs, but you need to understand that PESO approval is required for the fireballs. If you get the Thailand patented balls, that is also very standardized one. You can also use those ones. That is about the fireballs. Okay. So now one small question related to fire. What is the best way to protect yourself from smoke in the fire? Answer this question. Crawling. We are getting one response, crawling. Another is 4. Okay. 3 and 4. 2. Run away from smoke. Running is never recommended in fire. We will inhale more smoke while we are running. So the best way out of these 4 is cover the face with wet cloth, and crawling along with that is recommended. But best way is to cover the face with wet cloth, because wet cloth gives 30 to 35% filtration effect. So the best answer is 3, and crawling along with that is also recommended. Okay, so now let's discuss the classification of fire, and I will end the session here. There are a few slides related to the classification. I'm just showing directly those. Fire classification is about the type of fuel which is being used in fire. We discussed about fire triangle. there are three components: heat, fuel, and oxygen. So this classification is completely based on the type of fuel which is burning in the fire. So if we are talking about fire class A simply means there is solid fuel. Solid fuel is wood, cloth, paper, rubber, plastic. So anything which is normal solid, if that is burning, that is coming under class A fire. Class B includes the liquid fuel like petrol, kerosene, turpentine, alcohol, paint, thinner. So all the liquid fuels are, if they are burning, that will come under class B. Class C is a bit tricky. Why? Because class C includes the gaseous fuel. We use LPG. If there is fire in LPG, that will be class C. Natural gas, butane, propane, hydrogen, acetylene. These are some of the gases who are flammable in nature, and if there is fire in these gases, that will be class C. So after class C also have one more component. If the equipment is energized, then it will be class C. But if equipments are not energized, power is disconnected, then it will come under class A. So class C have two things. One is gas, another is energized electrical equipment. Class D is for metals, reactive metals like magnesium, sodium, potassium, titanium, zirconium. So if there is fire in these metals, that is coming under class D. For class A, water is very effective. For class B, foam type of extinguishers are very effective. For class C, if this is about the electrical equipment, then CO2 is recommended. And for the gases, fire, dry chemical powder type extinguishers are recommended. And for D, there is special type of extinguisher which is having TEC as the component that can be used. So there are some slides related to firefighting. I'm just skipping about those things. Fire safety at home, kitchen fire do's and don'ts, housekeeping. So this is about the fire. So considering the time limits, I'll be sharing these slides to all of you. You can go through. So the most important thing is to plan. Why we are spending our 4 to 5 hours in attending this training session is to make ourselves perfect in the planning for disaster. So if we fail to plan, we plan to fail. So this was all about the first session, and now the next, which Dr. Nishal will be taking care of, that will be taken by Dr. Nishal. So before I'll hand over the session at 3:32, still there are 3 to 4 minutes. If you want to ask something, any queries related to the session, you can send on the chat box. I understand that there may be some queries which are not answered, considering the time limits required to complete both the sessions. So there are some queries which require the detailed timing. Okay, so please talk about the qualities of team member selections. Okay, so this emergency response team member selection is done basis on the location, physical location of those team members. So you can do the selection of emergency response team members, and rather the preferable way is to ask for the nominations. Okay, so the qualities that they should be like, one very important quality which is required for all the emergency response team member is to take the quick decisions. So confidence about all the emergency situation is very important. That will come with the training. You need to train them in all the possible emergency situations for which you are making this emergency response team. So knowledge is one part. Then second is the confidence. They should feel confident in responding to those situations. Otherwise all the people who are dependent on emergency response team member, they will not feel safe along with them. So confidence is another aspect. So another aspect is to choose them basis on their physical availability in the campus or in the industry. some people are keep on traveling, so you cannot choose those as emergency response team members who are not available physically in the location. So knowledge, confidence, quick decision maker should be another very important quality, because we cannot wait for decisions. It should be quick decision in emergency. Any wrong decision in emergency can lead to life. So emergency response be quick decision makers. There should be clarity of thoughts with them. So these are some of the common qualities of emergency response team member which you can consider. And preferable way is to not choose them rather than ask for the nominations. So it will be selected basis on the interest of all the occupants in your premises and basis on their knowledge and competencies. You can develop the competencies and knowledge by the training sessions. Hydrogen sensors to be provided in generator cooling H2S system. Okay. Generator cooling H2S system. Okay. So this is a question or input you want to give. Hydrogen sensors to be provided in generator cooling H2 system. Okay. So any other input, any other thing? Okay. Anything on DRR, disaster risk reduction? So there are a lot of inputs on DRR, risk reduction, and we talk about resilience also. So those are very broad areas which require a lot of time in discussion. Is automatic firefighting required for 10 MVA transformer? For 10 MVA transformer, you need to have nitrogen injection based fire suppression system, especially in the transformers. So this is now recommended by authorities also, and very soon this change you will see in our national building code also. And as per Central Electricity Authority requirements, this 10 MVA transformers also recommended to have nitrogen injection based fire system. How we can control fire in forest? Okay, so starvation is the technique which is used in controlling the fire. So that is a detailed technique which includes creating a gap in the forest by putting the fire in controlled manner, and then it is extinguished. So starvation is the technique which is used in forest fire. Explain the word mainstreaming. So mainstreaming means you are including community, you are including the first responder in your disaster response. So it is related with the inclusion. And this mainstreaming term is also used with persons with disability. So you need to include them in the normal routine activities. So that is where this mainstreaming term is used. So nowadays, for persons with disability, there are standard guidelines available. And if you want to go into detail of these guidelines and standard, you can Google the global harmonized guidelines something. Let me check the exact name. Is harmonized guidelines for disabled. So this was published in year 2016. Let me share the screen just to answer your question related to mainstreaming. Hope you are able to see the screen. So these are the guidelines, harmonized guidelines and space standards for barrier-free built environment for persons with disability and elderly persons. It was published in February 2016, and we have dedicated legislation also related to it for persons with disability. So PWD standards are also. So this was released by Ministry of Urban Development, Government of India. It is NIFPS. What is NIFPS? I am getting one response related to that. Okay, so now since the time constraints are there, I'll still request you to send your queries via email, or you can note down my number. It is there, and I'm also texting in the chat box. We can take up those things at later on. So over to you, Dr. Nishal. Thank you so much. Thank you all the participants. I will be there in the session till the end, and I'll request all the participants to give feedback about the session also. We shall be sharing the link at the end of the session by Dr. Nishal.
Thank you, Manishi. I hope I'm audible.
Yeah, yes, sir. You're audible.
Yeah. Okay. Let me just share the screen as well. So, can anyone please tell me, is my screen visible?
It's not visible. It's not visible yet.
Okay. Is it now?
No, sir.
Wait, just give me a minute. Okay, so can you see the screen now?
Yes, it's visible now. You can see.
It is well. Okay. Okay. Just a request to everyone to please mute their videos, mute their audios. You can put your questions in the meeting chat box, and I'll try to give answer to all your queries. So because of the time constraint, I'll be taking topics a bit fast and try to make you understand the basics of the other topics related to disaster management and disaster risk reduction. So Manishi has wonderfully explained and summarized the introductory session, the introductory part of disaster management, the disaster risk, vulnerability, capacity building, and everything. And I'll just take it forward. We'll talk about the earthquake and mitigation. What are the mitigation measures? What are the preventive measures we can take to prevent the we can take to prevent the losses, or we can take to minimize the losses post an earthquake. So request again everyone to mute their mics. So let me just start. I'll just go again with the definition of mitigation. Like yesterday, see, mitigation measures or mitigation refers to the measures taken prior to the impact of a disaster to minimize its effects. These are sometimes referred to as structural and non-structural measures. So what basically mitigation is? Mitigation is basically, preparedness according to hazard. It can be fire hazard, like putting a fire extinguisher is form of mitigation only. Making an earthquake resistant structure is mitigation. Making a dam on a river because the river may have flood is a mitigation measure. So mitigation is basically taking prior steps of preparing ourselves according to the definitive hazard or definitive risk factor. The types of mitigation measures are divided into two: structural and non-structural measures. I'll just go ahead with this. What is the difference between structural and non-structural measures? And we'll be talking about this in regard to earthquakes, the earthquake hazard or earthquake disaster. So structural measures or structural components in terms of an earthquake. The structural components of a building are those that resist gravity, earthquake, wind, and other type of loads. These includes columns, beams, floors, slabs, load-bearing walls, pillars, etc. Typically, these are the components which are examined by engineers and architects. So if I try to put it in the form of a photograph, you can see this photograph. This is a typical photograph. This is the photograph of a typical building, wherein you have the ground floor and the first floor. You have this basement walls. You have columns. These all are the structural components. Means these are the components which defy gravity, or which are the basic. In simple words, you can say that structural components are basically the skeletal of a building, or these form the skeleton image of a building. Herein, like you can see, the skeleton of a building includes the floor, the roof, the exterior columns, the interior columns, okay, the pedestal, the slab. You can see these drop panels, these beams. So everything which forms the structure, or which forms the skeleton of a particular building, is structural component. These all are the structural components of a building. And accordingly, when we have identified these structural components being the roof, floor, slab, beams, columns, etc., we need to take measures before an earthquake to reinforce them, to strengthen them, or whenever we are building a structure, we have to first take into consideration that our structural components should be so strong, should be so resilient, that they are able to withstand any kind of a natural or a man-made hazard, be it the earthquake, wind damage, fire, or floods, or any other. Especially in terms of earthquake, when I say we need to keep this in mind, that the structure should be formed in, or structure should be in a such a way that it is able to take the pressure, or take withstand the hazard. Now, what are structural measures? Some structural examples of structural measures that we need to keep. At first, using good quality materials whenever making a building, doing a pre-studying of the land topography. What is the basic soil content, how porous the soil is, how how frequently earthquakes occur in that particular seismic zone. Identification of predisposing natural hazards. Apart from earthquake, is there any other natural hazard also present, like volcano, thunderstorms, or floods? Is there any other second disaster or second hazard also present, which is frequent in that particular area? A risk analysis of potential man-made hazards, very important, because apart from earthquake, there can be a lot of times, apart from the natural disasters, there can be a building or a structure can also face a lot of man-made hazards like riot, arson, and everything. So the structure has to be strong enough so that it can withstand such kind of man-made hazards. Regular assessment, reassessment, and annual maintenance contracts, or AMCs, of a particular building. Retrofitting of existing structures, like I'll just quote it in an example here. Like in buildings, usually if you have old buildings, you cannot put it down suddenly to make it earthquake resistant. But yes, in usually what we see in tall buildings, that we have basements, and to retrofit those basements, or to reinforce our structure, we can between these pillars, we can reinforce them. We can do a cross section like this. We can build a cross section like this, which will help in cross section like this, which will help in taking the load off, which will minimize the effect of earthquake, and which will in turn not weaken the pillars, and also disperse the vibrations, or disperse the force of earthquake, and the load bearing capacity of these pillars will also increase. Then we have a removal of unsafe buildings. This is the by far the most practical thing that can be done, but also it is very expensive. So mitigation measures, when we are taking, we have to take it also into account that they have to be pocket friendly for the people as well. Then regular monitoring of seismic activities. Seismic activity means the earthquake activity, we have to keep on, we should have a check on what are the how many earthquakes actually happen in our particular topography or particular area, say in a month or on a regular basis, on an yearly basis, and what is the Richter scale reading of those. So accordingly we can plan our structure or retrofit our structure. Then most importantly, whenever building a new structure, we have to keep in mind that earthquake resistant design for different seismic zones. See, we have different seismic zones: zone 1, 2, 3, 4. The one being which receives the lowest of the earthquake activity, and 4 or 5 being which receives the major earthquake activity, or which has the major activity which going under the ground. So according to every seismic zone, according to the severity of earthquake occurring in every administration district conditions puts out guidelines for safe structure construction, and what are the points that one needs to keep in mind when they are making a structure. So if you're going to build our commercial or residential establishment, we should look forward to those earthquake resistant design structures. And finally, the structural measures that need to be keep in mind whenever we are going for earthquake resilience, that development and enactment of building codes and standards, the National Building Code, NBC, it should be there. We have to keep in we should build our structure, right, or retrofit our structure according to the National Building Code, the NBC guidelines. Like this example that I gave you regarding the this cross beam for retrofitting of the structure. This is something which is a component of National Building Code. If you go through a National Building Code, it is easily available on the website of Urban and Housing Development Board, both on the central level and the state level as well. You will find these particular guideline for retrofitting beams and pillars in a basement establishment for to develop disaster earthquake resilience. Then we have some non-structural measures. So like in the structural measures, we had beams, pillars, slabs, floor, roof. And the non-structural measures, like in a building, whatever which is except from floor, slab, roof, pillar, beams, it comes into the non-structural component, or it is a part of the non-structural component of that particular building. And accordingly, we have to take the non-structural measures to prevent the loss or to prevent the destruction post a disaster. Common non-structural components include ceilings, windows, office equipment, HVAC, electrical equipment, furnishings, lights, etc. Everything apart from the walls and pillars. Walls, pillars, floors, roof, slabs. Your false ceiling, your ACs, your heating and ventilation system, your furnishing, lights, your electronic equipments, your TV, fridge, sofa set, anything and everything which is kept inside a room is a part of non-structural component of a particular establishment. Typically, these components are not examined by engineers and instead are specified by architects or interior designer. See, that is the difference, right? We talked about in the structural components that these are examined by engineers and architects, and while in the non-structural part, these are specified by architects or interior designers. Engineers don't have a part in it. Just have a look at this particular photograph. You will get to know, you will see that what are the non-structural components. See, I'll just put the structure in red. This is structural. This is structural. The floor, the roof. Okay, the floor. Okay, now everything apart from that is non-structural. Your electrical cable tray, your HVAC ductwork, suspended light fixtures, you see, this sofa, this, furniture and equipment, movable partitions, HVAC diffusers, this lighting, this tools and this furniture, everything is non-structural. you should understand, there's the thing that needs to understand this, that these non-structural components may be fixed to the structural components and may not to be. That means they may be movable and immovable. Like this, the chiller unit, this is an immovable non-structural element. Like this is fixed. You don't put it immovable in the sense that you fix it somewhere. It can be moved, it can be taken from one place to another, but just because of owing to its weight and its function, it just kept it one place. So non-structural components, they can be divided into three types. First are architectural component. That means interior partition, facades, ceilings, roofs, decks, chimney, plaster, glass window, lighting system, railing, doors, and exit routes. The second being equipment and contents like computer, printer, medical equipment, machine, industrial equipments, furniture, supplies, etc. And finally, and third being lifelines. That means your gas piping, your steam and HVAC, electrical wiring, drinking water, communications, sewage, fire sprinklers, circulation, etc. So three types. If I go again, architectural, then you have equipment and content, and the third being your lifeline. Significance of non-structural damage. Why we are talking more about the non-structural damage, or why we give more importance to non-structural damage things? Because at times the when an earthquake happens, not every time an earthquake happens or the ground shakes, the buildings fall. But yes, at times because of the the loose or improper fitting of these non-structural components, they may fall down and they may cause damage to life and property both. So non-structural damage has to be taken into account to a maximum scale. So as again, life safety, loss of function, property loss, that is why the significance of non-structural damage is more important. Types of non-structural damage, there are two types, direct and indirect. So indirect damage, what happens is, whenever a building shakes during an earthquake, the base of building moves in harmony with the ground, but entire building and the building contents of the base will experience initial force. At that time, the file cabinets, emergency power generating equipments, freestanding bookshelves, etc., they may fall down on, because of the shaking, because of the initial force, they may move from their place. Like, see, this is an example, direct damage. Earthquake happened, the floor, the roof fell down, the windows got the glass panes got broken, the equipment got the components sitting on the window, they fell down, and other things, they fell down. It's a direct component, it's a direct damage. But what happens, see, this is again direct damage. Things fell down because of the initial force. But what happens in indirect damage, in indirect damage, what happens is that the building structure is distort or bent and side to side in response to the earthquake force. It leads to torsion or twisting of most of the structures. Example, just have a look at this particular photograph. Here things, these glasses broke, the twisting of the frame because of the ground shaking. The things fell down directly, the things fell down. But what happened was, the things which were not supposed to fall down, or which couldn't fall down, or which couldn't get damaged directly, they twisted, they torsioned ahead because of the movement between the two beams, because of the initial force between two beams or slabs. They twisted and a torsion occurred, and it led to damage of the entire structure of a particular frame, of a glass frame, or of a the steel or iron frame. Wind damage to non-structural elements by high winds is similar to the damage caused by earthquake. Any questions so far? Anyone? Any questions? Okay, I have some questions. Let me just have a look at them, and I'll just let me wait a second. Okay, no questions so far as such. So when we are talking about the non-structural measures, the non-structural mitigation measures, these are of these are of 6 types. We jointly combine them under the mnemonic of 6 R's. That is removal, relocation, restraint, reinforcement, replacement, and reduction. What we do quickly, I'll just summarize it. In removal, we relocate or reposition items that cannot be secured so that they not block the exit doors. You know what can happen is that during an earthquake, if it all says this is a typical corridor, if we have put something heavy, if we have put a shelf or cabinet somewhere in the middle, it might fall down because of the earthquake and block the exit. So we need such things from the exit points, from the exit corridors. Relocate. Tall and narrow furniture can fall down. Objects that are much heavier on the top than on the bottom can easily topple in such directions. So again, citing the previous picture, I can say that we should relocate the structure from one place to another so that it doesn't, the heavy doorway, away from the heavy doors or away from the exit point, so that it shouldn't fall down, it shouldn't block the exit. See, if you see, we have put an NVIDIA behind the door, and in case of an earthquake, it fell down and it blocked the door. So the door cannot be opened. People cannot move out, or people cannot go into to rescue others. Restrain, very important thing. Small or large things can knock down into each other. So we have to keep in the things with the wheels, things with trolleys, on trolleys. There can be a lot of things. Our small tables, our washing machines, our printers. In the office, there are a lot of things which are put on trolleys or trolleys which can be easily moved. So it can be file trolleys, file cabinets. We should have all wheels. They have a restraining lock. Usually, the lock stays in this particular direction. It is unlocked. We should put it into this way. This is locked, so that when earthquake happens, this trolley doesn't move and damages the surrounding structures. This wheels should always be in a locked position. Replace, as I said earlier, the heavy things can fall down and cause damage. So we should avoid putting heavy things on the top of a shelf or a cabinet or a almirah, so that it doesn't fall down during earthquake and causes damage. We should keep light objects. While in normal practice, we actually keep the heavy objects on the top shelves, but we should avoid that. Reinforce, very important. Hanging objects can actually fall, and these are the things that actually cause a lot of damage. So heavy objects that are hung on the walls should be reinforced, should be, like in this particular photograph, you can see this particular chandelier. It is just, it has been reinforced by only 2 screws, and it can easily fall down. But instead, if we have reinforced, we would have reinforced it with 3-4 more strings, or if it would have been reinforced by 6, 7, 8 screws, it wouldn't have fallen down to post an earthquake. So at times, why people don't reinforce such things or avoid reinforcing structures is because it somewhere I will say causes the beauty to get modified, or doesn't render things more beautiful. But believe me, beauty will be of no use post an earthquake. If you don't reinforce our structures, it can cause a lot of damage to person and property both. Like an example, we'll say, just putting the photograph on a single nail, rather than putting it in this particular way, is a better way of reinforcing the hanging objects. For geysers, we usually put it only on one strip, but see here we have reinforced the geyser, a heavy object, with 3 iron beams. So the probability of falling of this geyser falling down in after an earthquake shock are very less compared to the first one. The same thing, look at the water tank. Here, most of the people have put the water tanks to increase, the area on their terraces. They usually hang them on the wall, but this is not recommended. This is the way that it should be. It can easily this particular beam can easily bend during an earthquake shock, and when it will bend, it will cause the damage. The water spill, this may fall down, and if there are electrical sockets nearby, then it can cause electrical shock as well. So a primary disaster can lead to a secondary disaster. And here, if you see this particular pic, the correct way of reinforcing a water tank, it has been placed on a proper iron slab, on a proper iron frame, and then this particular frame has also been reinforced to the ground, so that after a earthquake shock, it doesn't fall down and spill. The water is spilled, and there is no potential, electric shock hazard or any other hazard to which people are exposed to, in addition to the primary earthquake disaster. And finally, the sixth R, that is reduction. That is, reduction simply means reducing the number of non-structural components in the building. That means just declutter. Don't put a lot of things in your room or in your building which you don't need. That also includes, the structures which are part of your, which you used to beautify. Beautify your place, decorate your place, but decorate with a vision that, things don't actually fall off, things don't actually fall down and cause damage to you or your loved ones or to your other components. Thank you. Any questions in this? Any questions? Okay, so let me just take some questions. So for how wind damage of structures, equipments as which, the wind damage can cause structure damage to the structural and non-structural components like an earthquake, because it is like an earthquake. The things are moving in a high speed. Okay. Why architect engineers are not combined for designing the building? So I didn't say that architect and engineers are not combined for building. They are combined for building, but I'm saying for non-structural components, usually, the engineers don't usually give. Engineers don't tell you at times where to place the TV or where to place the sofa. It is at times the architect who is telling you where to put these things. So it is always imperative that you, whenever you are planning structural and non-structural components, take into account the guidelines by both of them. How to check structural integrity after an earthquake? Sir, you can do a quick analysis yourself, or you can call a structural engineer. Calling a structural engineer would be a better option. So, sir, stability check of structure is mandatory. Yes, you have to follow NBC guidelines whenever you are building a structure, National Building Code guidelines. If you are not, then your structure can be, if there's a sudden audit, your structure can be declared as unsafe. So you should do it, and for this you have to hire a structural engineer for having a safety audit or structure audit. Once a year should be done. Sir, at least 2 cross sections should be required are required between 2 columns, and that too in a crisscross manner. Anything else? Okay, let's go to the second presentation. Munishji,
Yes, Dr. Nisha.
Munishji, मेरे पास अब time कम है. I have only 15 minutes left. So shall I take the CPR presentation or the pandemic one? Because I have only 15 minutes now.
Pandemic we can take. Pandemic is
okay. Let me take the pandemic one. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I hope my screen is visible.
Yes, it's visible.
Yeah, okay. So I will talk about some health and wellness things, the tips and the disaster management. What are the things that we need to keep in our mind when we are talking about the disaster
Dr.
management part?
Nishchal,
Yes, ma'am.
sorry to interrupt, but we have 30 minutes left, so you can easily
Ma'am,
cover
the last part has to be taken. Some things which Munishi need to clarify, so he needs 15
Okay,
minutes
okay,
for
no
that.
issue, no
Yeah,
issue.
yeah,
Then
So,
go ahead.
so we decided that at least last 10-15 minutes should be on more on the question answers because
yeah.
there could be still more questions. So considering the time, we will cover the pandemic part first, and then we
Yeah, if
can
it
have
time
a
permits, we
small
can take
5-7 minutes video demonstration on CPR and heart attack. That is,
Okay,
if that
okay,
can.
no
yeah,
issue. Sir.
yeah. Okay. Hmm.
Okay.
So I'll quickly go through these slides. These are some really basic things, but see, the basic thing about disaster management, disaster risk reduction, or you will say disaster preparedness and planning. There's one thing that everyone needs to keep in mind, that disaster or disaster management is not a rocket science. And the very word disaster, the disaster states that it is something which is unexpected. So when something occurs unexpected, it requires us to take unexpected measures, and these unexpected measures at times come out with the best of the presence of mind. So we have to understand that we need not to panic, we need to maintain our calm and channelize our inner energy and our the mental strength towards finding out a solution to a particular disaster situation. And I think that is where the best, uh, if you look at the past examples, if you say look out at the disaster studies in India or internationally, the best of the situations, the best of the solutions have come out in worst of the situations where people have used the presence of their mind to respond to a particular hazard or disaster. So let me just quickly go through this presentation. This presentation in basically two parts. The first part being health and wellness during lockdown or pandemic, and the second part being planning a disaster response. I'll go through the first part, the health and wellness during lockdown and pandemic. The first part being the psychological issues during lockdown, that there have been stress, and the different things that have come part is anxiety, restlessness, frustration, fear, nervousness, depression, suicidal tendencies, schizophrenia, split personalities. People have been under a lot of stress. The people who were really outgoing couldn't find time to go and to meet their family members. People are stuck somewhere. So these were the common psychological issues that cropped up people at that particular time. And still, I won't say that since the lockdown thing has been totally, the curb has been uplifted, but still people are under stress because people cannot go to offices. The offices are still not open, and if offices are even open, the schools are open. People are not. People are trying to stay at home to avoid catching infection. So what needs to be done apart from the regular thing that people are doing? Uh, I'm just putting out some experiences, some basic suggestions that are that should be taken to de-stress. The first one being pick an old hobby. There's always an hobby that you can cultivate in your free time, and it will actually help you in de-stressing. Try to learn a new skill, and it can be really basic as taking up cooking, gardening, photography, or anything. You can even play a video game. I think this is also counted as a skill that you're looking at. Those hi-fi video games that have come up. So connect and communicate, very important. Review your old ties, call your old friends, your family members, talk to your cousins. It helps. It definitely helps to de-stress. Watch old photo albums. In disaster response plan, we always, when we talk about making a disaster kit, we always ask people to put up old photographs, so that those are the stress times, and you're stuck somewhere. If you can look at your loved ones, it actually helps you de-stress. Music and trance meant to be, as found out to be a really big stress buster. And meditation, yes, any kind of meditation, be it spiritual or non-spiritual, it can be guided, it can be breathing exercises, anything. These things can help you de-stress post a pandemic. diet and exercise during pandemic, I state a very simple 3-2-3 formula for that, which is 3 major meals, 2 minor meals, and 3 liters of water a day. That means uh, you should have, the pandemic means you have to increase your immunity. And, having all those Ayurvedic kadhas or, all those herbal medicines is not going to increase your immunity if you don't exercise, if you eat at proper intervals, if you didn't take proper rest. So I simply say that, have your meals on time. That is, have your breakfast, lunch, and dinner on time. Don't skip your meals. Have 2 minor meals. That is, 1 midday and 1 evening brunch. And take minimum 3 liters of water a day, so that you don't dehydrate yourself. And in this pandemic situation, in the viral fever or in a viral attack, any kind of virus attacks the cells and it causes cells to dehydrate. That is why you have body pains and body aches in any kind of a flu, in any kind of a viral infection. So to avoid that, have at least 3 liters of water a day. And don't take late night meals, don't walk immediately after eating, and avoid excess use of salt and sugar. And for the diet and exercise part during a pandemic, I state a 3S formula. That is stretch, steps, and stairs. That is, you do a complete body stretching for at least 5 to 10 minutes daily from head to toe. It will definitely help in increasing your immunity. Steps, that you should have at least 6 to 8,000 steps per day. That means 60 minutes to 80 minutes of walk, and an average adult walks 1,000 steps in a regular 10-minute walk. Stairs, an American university recently did a survey, and they find out that if people walk stairs for 7 minutes a day, the chances of having a heart attack are reduced to up to 50%. So always walk minimum 7 minutes a day. Walk stairs for everyone every day for 7 minutes to reduce the chances of heart attack. Don't, if I'm saying all these things, I'll say that don't start rigorous workout. Instead, plan and go slow, and slowly and gradually increase your speed. You can do a lot of different yoga poses. Then alternative medicine and pandemic, I'll just go fast in it, that you can take a lot of stress on the Ayush, the Ayurveda, yoga, Unani, homeopathy medicines. You can take all this, but whatever you do, just don't take it without consultation of a physician. Always take it in consultation with your physician. I just skipped it. Yes, planning a disaster response, very important. Has anyone a question? I think someone is asking something. Any questions? Okay. So whenever you're planning a disaster response during pandemics, we should understand first thing very importantly that that is the risk factors. Like Manishi has talked about the risk reduction on risk factors yesterday only. Before going into the risk factors, that understand the disaster profile of India also. The 40% of land in India comes under high seismic zone. That is, 40% of land in India is prone to earthquakes. Higher, it has high chances of having an earthquake. 2/3 of the Indian subcontinent is surrounded by water. If you see, the southern part of India is surrounded by water bodies, the oceans, the Indian Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, the Bay of Bengal. 30% of land in India is prone to landslides and avalanches. So apart from, if we now imagine we face a disaster over and above the current situation of COVID-19 epidemic, right? Just take for example, you are in Delhi and the COVID-19 epidemic is all around. The people are moving out, people are wearing masks, people are taking all the sanitary measures, and suddenly an earthquake happens, and and it causes destruction in an area, in a confinement zone, in a zone where there are more than 100 plus confirmed cases of COVID-19, and the area has been sealed. Suddenly there is an earthquake, and it causes buildings to fall down, the offices, schools, hospitals, all the buildings come down. Just imagine, what are we going to do? How we are going to reduce the risk? How we can, there is a primary disaster, the COVID-19 is there, and suddenly a secondary disaster, that is earthquake, happens. So two disasters, now we are facing two disasters. How are you going to cope that? How is, we're going to make a response plan? What are the things that we need to keep in mind? So this is where, making a disaster preparedness plan, or the basic information of how disaster management plan should be made, both on an individual and on a community basis. We need to keep few things in mind. Let's take two important risk factors in consideration. Those are being infrastructure and health and hygiene. Primary disaster often leads to secondary disasters, so planning risk reduction can go a long way in saving lives of people. Infrastructure, always keep a check on the following: your water supply, leakage or any breakage, electricity, there should not be any kind of loose wires. Fire safety, adequate cylinders, a proper fire safety plan, extra supplies of bulbs, tube lights, torch, etc. Sanitation, there should not be no choking, blockage or leakage. See, very important, people often overlook the sanitation part of a disaster, or sanitation part of a normal life. And after any disaster, the sanitation issues are going to be very important. So we have to keep in mind that there should not be any choking, blockage or leakage of our sanitation channels. Worn out ceilings, old structure, rusty fittings, these are all the infrastructure risk factors that we need to keep in mind, and we need to keep a check on them. Similarly, the health risk factors, any kind of a pre-existing illness in the family, do we have sufficient medicine for the people who are living in our family for a particular illness? Any kind of a genetic disease pattern, any past history of illness? First aid, do we have a first aid kit with essential medical supplies? Do we know how to do first aid, basic life support, and are we equipped with CPR training? Do we have a list of ICE, that is in case of emergency contact, and other emergency numbers in our phones or in a diary? We have to keep this with us in any kind of a disaster, so that if anything ill happens, we have a list of people to connect to or call up for help. Making an emergency response kit, it is important to keep in mind the type of emergencies one faces in everyday life, all the hazards or the factors one is exposed to, and the emergency response kit should take care of three basic aspects. That is the roti, kapda and makan, that is the food, clothing and shelter. A disaster survival bag, we call it. We should make a disaster response bag or disaster response kit, or we call it a go-go bag every time. Whenever we are, it should be a part of your disasters emergency response plan. That it should contain the four parts, that is the roti, kapda, makan and saman. The roti being your dry food, water bottles, chlorine tablets to clean the water, medicines. The kapda being a spare supply of undergarments. Post disasters, people often overlook the part of sanitation. You can survive in the clothes that you're wearing for 7 days, but you cannot wear your undergarments for the 3 days for it to stretch. If you wear them, it can cause UTI. So an extra supply of undergarments in a bag, sanitary napkins, diapers, hand sanitizers, a rope and blanket, a bed sheet, a tarpaulin sheet, to make a makeshift tent, or to, whenever if you're lying down somewhere open, you can cover yourself, sir. And the saman, the basic necessities things being a first aid kit, some cash, a handheld radio, a lighter, a whistle, a pair of slippers, a knife. You can all put all these things according to your needs, according to your situations, in a small bag and keep it with you near the exit of your office, of your home, anywhere, so that whenever you're moving out, if there's an earthquake that happens and you're moving out of the house, you just pick up that bag and you can survive. In case the building falls down, you can survive on the road for next 2 to 3 days till the emergency help supply, the emergency help or the government aid comes to your help. creating a perfect response plan. Whenever you're making a disaster management, a disaster response plan, we have to keep in mind few things. And what are those things? The first and most important thing, that the community involvement is most important. The community has to be involved in all the disaster management plan. It should be community based. It should be, the community should be involved. You should take into consideration, the religion, the race, the age of people, how many children you are in the community that you are serving, how many aged there are, males, females, everything, every aspect you have to cover in it. Always go local. You have to always go local. You have to understand the local needs. Disaster management plan for Rajasthan may be different has to be different and will be different, because the needs of people of Rajasthan are very different from the needs of people in Tamil Nadu. So if we are making disaster management plan for two different places, always understand what are the needs of community and what are the local things that need to be local. The temperature, the weather, the local needs of people. There has to be a quick assessment of all the needs post a disaster, and stay unbiased. That is, the plan should be flexible so that it can cater to a large number of people. Cover all aspects of food, clothing, and shelter. Water is a very basic amenity and should be taken care of primarily. See, this is something which we have learned. We have worked in disaster management and a lot of times. So this is something that we have learned on ground. That food, clothing, and shelter is the first thing. Water is very important. आपको कुछ भी देना है, आपको पानी जरूर देना है. Water is very important. Sanitation is the biggest issue during and post disaster and can lead to further medical emergencies and secondary disasters like epidemics. So sanitation has to be taken care of primarily. Females have special needs which need to be addressed, be it menstruating females, be it females carrying kids. Females are more prone to UTI, that is urinary tract infection. So we have to take care of all those things. And effective communication is actually at times ruined by rumors, hoax news. So a perfect response plan should include the correct information reaches people through trusted resources. There should not be any hoax news. Okay. Examples. If I say a rice eating population will prefer dal rice over chapati or sabji or puri sabji. Children prefer glucose biscuits over cream or flavored cookies. Tea is the most important part of meal in India and thus should be a part of your response plan. People pick water instead of juice or cold drinks. Thank you. Any questions in this? Okay, the chlorine tablets. The chlorine tablets are used to purify the waters. Any questions? Any questions, please? Any questions? Munishi, I think you should take over and have a discussion now.
Thank you, Dr. Nishal. So it was quite an interesting session, more from the perspective of individual actions and what should be done at community level in case of pandemic situation like COVID-19. And there were a lot of good examples related to structural and non-structural mitigations, which was given by Dr. Nishal. So now I'll request all the participants, you can put your comments, feedback, and there is one feedback link which has been shared. I'm just sharing it again. So I request for giving feedback on this link so that we can compile and analyze what improvements is required, and if you have good comments related to the session, you can put all those things in this link. So another request again would be to keep your camera on so that we can take screenshots like digital group photograph like we took yesterday. And parallelly, your comments, suggestions, questions are also requested. You can share your uh, comments about the session, and specifically there can be some questions which can be answered in short span of time. So we still have 5 to 7 minutes. We intentionally closed the sessions uh, 5 to 7 minutes before, just to take more queries and listen to your comments. So we can see now a lot of participants on screen. PPT will be sent to all the participants, so it will be sent to all of you. Dr. Nischal, CPR videos, there is, we are getting comments related to CPR videos also.
Yes, sir. I can see. I can see. So what I will do, I'll just quickly sum it up in 2 to 3 minutes. Just give me a minute.
Okay.
I hope I am visible now. I hope, right? So let's
You're not visible.
Am I visible? Okay, wait. No, my video visible or not?
No, it's not visible.
I have turned my camera on.
Well, okay. There are some questions which are coming. I'll take after this video.
So I think everyone can see me. I'll just take a quick session on CPR.
You can, on your video, Dr. Nischal, we are not able to see you still. Your camera is off, I guess.
My camera is on.
No, visible, sir, visible.
Visible. It's visible to everyone.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Now you are
Okay.
visible.
So I'll just quickly take CPR, the heart attack and the CPR part. See, after every disaster, like I talked about on the previous slide, in disasters, after every disaster, you can say people get into a lot of stress, the emotional stress, the mental stress, and because of that, people at times feel, a lot of people have heart attacks post that, and some people have cardiac arrest. So first thing to understand is the difference between a heart attack and a cardiac arrest. There are two things, both of them involve the heart attack and the cardiac arrest. So what is heart attack and what is cardiac arrest? The very two words in these two words, they tell you that what the condition is. A heart attack. A heart attack means attack on the heart. Attack on heart. If you attack someone, say for an example, if you attack someone, the person may die or may not die. Okay. So if there's an attack on heart and the person survives, the person becomes completely well. If there's a heart attack, people at times do the angioplasty. They put the arteries are blocked, the blood vessels are blocked. Doctors do the angiography or angioplasty, and the patient recovers. But if the patient doesn't recovers after attack on heart, that is, if after heart attack the person becomes totally unconscious, person is not able to breathe, person is lying lifeless, there is no pulse, there is no breathing, then the situation is termed as cardiac arrest. That is, cardiac means heart, arrest means the person has been put into jail. Okay, so that is the situation of cardiac arrest. That is, The heart has been totally arrested down. The heart has been totally, it is under arrest. It cannot move. It cannot go anywhere. It cannot perform any kind of function. Can you see my video or not?
Okay, so just for an information, it's not in video, it's live demonstration by Dr. Nischal. You can pin Dr. Nischal by selecting in the participants if you are able to do that.
Yeah,
We'll be
please
seeing
pin
the
the
live
video.
demonstration
I'm
done by
not
Dr.
putting a
Nischal.
video. Yeah. Thank you, Munishi, for clearing it. So what happens in after a cardiac arrest? That is, there is no breathing, there is no pulse. So patient, that means the victim has died. There is no pulse, there is no breathing. So patient is no more. And what we do after a cardiac arrest is CPR. And what is CPR? CPR is cardiopulmonary resuscitation or cardiopulmonary massage. What we do in it is, I'll just show you.
कस्टमर केयर को फोन दोबारा वो आप जल्दी लेडी ने मना कर दिया तो कह रही कि हमने आपकी वो जो दूसरे को ट्रांसफर कर दी.
See what happens in a CPR is what we do in a CPR is that after cardiac arrest. Sir, please mute your mic. Please mute your mic. So what happens in what we do in a CPR activity is, or what we do, that the patient is lying lifeless. Patient has no breathing. The chest wall is not moving upwards and downwards. There is no pulse in the hand or in the neck. What we do is, what we are in the CPR, it is called cardiopulmonary resuscitation or cardiopulmonary revival. What we are doing is, we are trying to revive a person through thrusting on the heart. What we do when the person is lying down, first of all, we have to make sure, we have to understand that CPR is done only after cardiac arrest and not after heart attack. That means if the person is alive, we should not do CPR. But if the person is dead, we have to do CPR. And then what we have to do, first we have to check whether the person is alive or dead. So how it is done? First of all, we bring our ear close to the patient's or the victim's mouth. By this way, we can appreciate two things. First of all, we can see whether the patient is able to breathe in. We can hear the breathing sounds or not. And simultaneously, our eyes are tilted towards the patient's chest. So the patient is lying down and he or she is breathing. We will see the chest wall going up and down. Secondly, if there is no pulse, then the second thing that we need to check is the pulse. Now the pulse is checked either on the wrist towards the thumb, or we check the pulse. We check the pulse in the sides of the neck. If you see here, in this particular mannequin, we'll check the pulse in the side of the neck. So we have checked. The first thing that we have done is check the breathing. Second thing that we do is check the pulse. If the breathing is absent, if the pulse is absent, that means the person is dead, and we immediately start CPR. Then what has to be done in CPR? We start with the cardiopulmonary massage, or we start with giving thrusts on the chest. Where it is done? In the center part of chest, where the chest bone ends, you put the 3 fingers. The area above that is your cardiac area, the heart area in the center of chest. Cross your fingers like this. Put in this area. Your elbows should be straight. Bend down on the victim's body and start compressing the chest wall. You have to exert pressure from your shoulders. If you see me, you have to do it with your shoulders. Your elbows should be straight, they should not bend. You should lie close to the victim and start pressing the chest wall. What will happen when you're pressing the chest wall? The heart will start pumping the blood to other parts of body as well as to the brain. And as soon as the blood reaches the brain, the chances of patient getting alive are increased to the maximum degree. Okay, that's it. We'll do a brief session with you, a bigger session with you, I suppose. In a very short I have explained, but yes, we'll do a bigger session, a better session, so that we are able to understand the basics of heart attack, CPR, cardiac arrest, and everything. Over to you, Nishi.
Thank you, Dr. Nishal. So we are done from our side. Still, I'll request again, you can send your feedbacks. And there are few participants who are saying that not to watch the video. So it was not video, it was the live demonstration that you need to just pin Dr. Nishal and you would be able to see the live demonstration. But that has been done. It was very short demonstration session on CPR. So over to Lamba sir, if you're there.
Thank you, Manish. And I think if there is no question, we can close it now.
Sure.
Any question, please, from the participants? Okay, I think there is no question, no query. And now we have come to the end of the webinar. In 2 days, various topics have been covered by Mr. Munish and Dr. Nishchal. It was found that all the participants remained participative nicely by putting the questions in the chat box. And it was also appreciated that first day's suggestions given by the participants have been taken here and covered by Shri Munish in the today's session. Thank you, Mr. Munish. And Dr. Nishchal has covered the topics related with the earthquake, structural and non-structural mitigation, preparedness, and also he explained the medical requirements related with pandemic and short session of CPR also. In nutshell, I can say that all the topics delivered by both the faculties were very nicely, and it was a very good interactive session of 2 days and well taken by the participant. I hope so. I convey my thanks to Mr. Munish and Mr. Nishchal, Dr. Nishchal, and all participants along with the management of the organizations those have nominated the participants. Also, my thanks to the CBIP, IT officials,